Americans can't seem to move fast enough or spend enough to embrace clean energy.
There's a lot that's happening to try to take that clean electricity and magnify its benefits by supporting the transition to electric cars.
But all is not bright behind those shiny new objects.
Is clean energy less polluting?
It's only a question of which pollution do you prefer. Choose your poison.
This week, we investigate some of the dirty little secrets behind clean energy.
Computer chips, essential to making today's world work, are in critical short supply, and now it's a matter of national security.
China have dramatically increased their investment in this field.
This week, a look at one piece of legislation that both sides cry is critical, spending your tax dollars to make more chips.
What are your major concerns when it comes to adversaries like China and Russia in cyberspace?
One is the danger of a catastrophic cyber attack.
And we speak with Senator Angus King, co-chair of a critical committee tasked with stopping the next crippling attack on America.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. Today, a hard look at one little discussed reality of the multi-billion-dollar green energy industry. Whether we're talking wind, solar, or electric, they're marketed as environmentally friendly and clean, the opposite of dirty, polluting fossil fuels. But it's not so simple. What we think of as clean power can take a surprising toll on the environment. We examine the difficult equation when it comes to clean and green.
In the wide-open state of Colorado, they're marching ahead with an arsenal of clean, green energy initiatives to be 100% carbon-free by 2040.
There's a large amount of both wind and solar generation coming into the state.
Will Torr heads up the Colorado Energy Office. He used a green mode of transportation to get to our interview at a park in Denver.
What is the state doing in terms of zero-emission vehicles?
So there's a lot that's happening to try to take that clean electricity and magnify its benefits by supporting the transition to electric cars.
Across the country, clean green energy has become a key strategy for those who insist man is both hurting and capable of fixing the world's climate. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez embodied the concern with a famously dire prediction 3 years ago.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it?
Though she later said she didn't mean it literally, like-minded leaders are pushing hard to discourage fossil fuel habits, and it's big business in terms of taxpayer dollars. President Biden's Build Back Better Act proposal reportedly includes the most tax money ever spent on climate causes, much of it aimed at cutting carbon dioxide sources that come from burning coal, oil, and natural gas. But amid the good intentions, there's a hard truth.
Nothing that we do in energy is really clean.
Stephen Koonin was Undersecretary for Science in the Energy Department under President Obama. He says the dirty little secret is that clean energy is not.
You know, somebody once said to me, the only humans who don't pollute are dead ones.
Is clean energy, or what we think of as clean energy, less polluting, though, than the traditional forms of energy we know about?
In terms of carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions more generally, yes. But there are other pollutants, if you like, that are created in building clean energy devices that are different than conventional energy. And it's only a question of which pollution do you prefer. Choose your poison.
So how do the most popular forms of renewable energy stand up on the clean and green front?
Wind seems entirely clean because you build those big turbines or windmills, and all they do is take in the wind.
Well, first of all, wind takes a lot of land. Secondly, we've got to make special magnets and other components inside the wind turbine. And they consist of rare earth materials that are difficult to mine and create pollution when they're extracted and refined. And so they're going to be waste, acids, water, other minerals that you may not want in the environment, elements like mercury.
At the other end of a windmill's lifespan, giant used and useless blades. Tens of thousands of them, some the length of a football field, go to landfills like this one in Casper, Wyoming. There's an ongoing search for more wide open spaces to bury more.
There seem to be fewer things that are as appealing as the idea of just taking in sun power and using it.
Yeah.
But solar panels, like windmills, pollute on both ends of their lifespan.
You can go to solar fields in Southern California and you can see the relics of all the solar panels that people have put up. They're just sitting there and nobody's doing anything to clean it up.
Are there chemicals and metals in there?
Yeah, it's all, yes, silicon, steel, other exotic metals.
That are not good for the
environment.
environment.
Not good for the environment, no. Currently, most of the solar panels are made in China. And where does China get the energy to do that? Coal, of course. And
So it takes coal to make solar panels to make the clean energy.
Absolutely, absolutely. It takes energy to do anything, and right now the world gets 90% of its energy from carbon-based fuels.
That concern, again, is not accurate.
But Tour, Colorado's energy czar, says in terms of clean and green, wind and solar still come out on top.
As it turns out, when you burn coal or when you burn gasoline, you then have to run it through a rather inefficient process. So you burn gasoline and you lose about 70% of the energy to heat. You burn coal, and in your most efficient power plant, you lose about half of it to heat. Whereas what you're getting from wind and solar is directly useful energy.
So what about the third pillar of America's most popular clean green energy?
There's a lot of emphasis being put, for example, on electric cars so that there are not these emissions coming from cars. They rely on batteries. Is that a clean source?
The batteries, again, lithium, not good stuff to be dealing with. Moreover, if the cars are going to run on electricity, you've got to get the electricity from somewhere. And right now, for most of the U.S., the grid is just about as dirty as the gasoline you would use in order to run the cars in the first place.
I think most of the electricity in this country is generated through fossil fuels. So just saying something is electric or battery powered doesn't mean that a problem is being solved.
You know, that's an argument that made a lot of sense 15 years ago, but it's out of date. Electricity is the one part of the economy that is dramatically shifting away from sort of its traditional sort of coal-based generation towards much lower emissions generation.
So you're saying now when vehicles plug in for their electricity, they're not necessarily supporting or using fossil fuel electricity?
You know, there's no grid that's 100% clean yet, but it is much cleaner than it used to be, and it's much cleaner than burning gasoline in an internal combustion engine.
The challenges and debates don't end when it comes to the calculus for nuclear, hydro, and geothermal. There does seem to be a broad agreement that alternative energy will continue to become more prevalent. Just no hard facts on what their ultimate toll on the environment will be.
I think that when you look at the current state of certainly wind and solar technology, they are just orders of magnitude cleaner than traditional fossil fuel generation. Are they perfect? No, they're not perfect. And there is no energy technology that's ever going to be perfect.
What is an overarching message or a takeaway message if we're looking at the question of, is clean energy really clean and where we're headed?
I think we can have a grid that is emitting less CO2, but it's going to cost us more if we wanted to keep it reliable as well. And it will be some combination of wind and solar together with battery storage.
Do you think there is no role for fossil fuel in the future, or very little role?
Oh, I think fossil fuels are going to be with us for a very long time.
Coonan says the biggest challenge is that we don't yet have the technology to create a power network that is affordable, reliable, and clean. Ahead on Full Measure, fixing the chip shortage with your tax dollars. You may have heard there's an ongoing shortage of computer chips that go into everything from computers and cars to equipment for the U.S. military. Now Scott Thuman reports there's a plan to solve the problem using your tax dollars.
In a race against time and under the pressure of a tight deadline,
we are a company that does very high-tech electronics associated with military radios.
Bruce Montgomery and his team at Centonics, a technology company based in Maryland, diligently pieced together equipment used to extend the range of radio signals.
Most of our customers have tactical communications requirements. They need their radios in a command center in the basement of a building or in a tunnel or in a cave. And in a lot of cases, the antennas are too far away to connect them using anything other than optical fiber. So you have to use optical fiber to get the radio signals in and out.
The due date on a contract for the U.S. military just weeks away. A complicated process made more challenging in the wake of a pandemic disrupting global supply chains, clogging ports, and bottlenecking deliveries.
It means that when we call up the distributor to order something, the distributor goes, "Sorry, we don't have any." And you go, "What?" It's like going to the grocery store and being told they don't have toilet paper. That's a very sophisticated part that gets...
For Bruce and his team, it's all about semiconductors, that tiny critical ingredient needed to make it all work.
We've got microcontrollers, microprocessors, so all of these fancy integrated circuits, most of which are designed in the United States, few of which are actually fabricated here. They're mostly fabricated in Asia.
Few indeed. A mere 12% of the global supply of semiconductor chips used to make smartphones, refrigerators, and defense industry equipment work are produced in the United States. Among their uses, controlling temperature sensors and managing power to illuminate electronic displays. Compare that to the volume produced in just 4 different parts of Asia, manufacturing more than 70% of the world's chips. Getting your hands on them, however, a different story. It takes about 6 months between ordering and delivery.
We've got huge shipping problems right now, but the production's also a real problem. We've had a couple of Chinese suppliers tell us they're only allowed to have electricity 2 hours a day. So the whole supply chain, from soup to nuts, is screwed up.
Have we become too reliant on products from Asia?
Based on this COVID experience, I'd say, yeah, we've become overly reliant.
High time for that to change, according to Senator Mark Warner, who knows something about chips. He co-founded the early mobile phone company Nextel in 1987, and today says it's critical the U.S. creates its own resilient supply of chips.
Other nations, particularly China, have dramatically increased their investment in this field because who controls the supply of semiconductor chips really controls, in many ways, the economic future.
Which is why he's calling for the federal government to invest taxpayer dollars in the American semiconductor industry through a bipartisan bill he co-sponsored known as CHIPS, the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors Act. President Biden late last month called on Congress to finish the job, just as chip manufacturer Intel announced it'll invest more than $20 billion to build 2 chip factories near Columbus, Ohio.
I want to see Congress pass this bill right away and get it to my desk. Let's get another historic piece of bipartisan legislation done.
The CHIPS Act, which puts forward $52 billion, $40 billion of it, which would go to build new chip facilities here, $12 billion for research and development. We're hoping to get it past the House, because if we don't make this investment, there will not be a new semiconductor manufacturing facility ever built again, I think, in America.
The U.S. has a lot of catching up to do. Since 2011, the Chinese government has spent over $100 billion subsidizing its own semiconductor industry.
With all due respect, every lawmaker who sponsors a bill or writes a bill says this is the one we need to pass. This one is so urgent. why are we to believe that that's the case?
Well, this past July, 68 of us, broadly bipartisan, we said this needs to go to the front of the line. South Korea alone is investing $135 billion. Japan is somewhere between 50 and 70 billion. And the chip manufacturing capital of the world over the last 20 years is Taiwan.
The limited supply of chips not only jeopardizes business at Syntonix, it's a threat to a corporation as large as General Motors, which last fall physically shut down numerous assembly lines across North America for 2 weeks when it ran out of chips. Thousands of cars missing that small part used to power sunroofs and enable blind spot detection sat idle, workers sent home. Wall Street investment strategies further complicating the issue.
This is happening at a time when venture capital firms are pouring money into China's chip sector. What's your reaction to that?
I've been so disappointed with so much of American business who say, well, we see how China is treating its people in terms of human rights, but the Chinese market is so big, we can't turn away from it. They're chasing the easy money, sometimes at the cost to national security. Part of the law in China requires any private company that their first responsibility is not to their shareholders, it's to the Communist Party. And I find it outrageous, frankly, if there are American and, for that matter, other Western companies helping to finance that.
We've got a variety of projects going on.
Most of 2022 will pass before Syntonix and its supplier are expected to get back up to speed. In the meantime, he'll keep scouring the globe.
If they aren't available, I honestly don't know what we're going to do.
So let's say Congress provides the $52 billion tax dollars. How long would it be before more chips are actually made in the U.S.?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be overnight. I'm told that even if we act with a sense of urgency, it could take up to 5 years just to build the proper facilities. And then there's a workforce. Senator Warner says there's plenty of trained employees across the country from building chips over the past 20 years that then could be used in these positions. But you would clearly have to train more, and that too would take a lot of time.
Really good information. Thanks a lot, Scott. And coming up on Full Measure, preparing for a massive cyber attack. It's widely recognized that a cyber attack is one of our biggest national security concerns and threats. But I bet most of you didn't know of a first-of-its-kind commission to develop a national strategy that recently finished 2 years of work. It's the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, the name based on President Eisenhower's Project Solarium, which developed new policies for the Cold War. Senator Angus King was a co-chair of the cyber body and today speaks with me about its mission.
Our response to cyber attacks had been sort of disjointed and all over the place. The idea was, let's take a comprehensive look at this problem and figure out what we need to do. And the commission had a unique structure that I think contributed to its success. We had 4 sitting members of Congress, bipartisan. We had 4 people from the executive branch, and then we had 6 from the private sector. But the basic idea was to set up a structure that would give us some definition of a cyber strategy for the country.
Can you highlight some of the biggest recommendations
Sure.
that have been implemented and also some of the recommendations that haven't that you think are important?
Yeah, I think one of the most important ones that we made was the creation of what's called a National Cyber Director, appointed by the President in the Executive Office of the President, confirmed by the Senate. Why? Because cyber is scattered all over the federal government in half a dozen or more agencies, and there was a lack of coordination. President Biden appointed a fellow named Chris Inglis, who was a member of our commission, to that job. He's in the job now, and he's fabulous. Ones that haven't been implemented yet that, frankly, I'm disappointed. I was hoping we were going to be able to do them this year in the defense bill, is improvements in the infrastructure for the relationship between the private sector and the government. In cyber, 85% of the target space is in the private sector. Airlines, banks, the energy grid, pipeline systems, that's where the attacks come and will come. So the federal government can help, but there has to be a relationship, a new kind of relationship of trust and mutual information sharing. Unfortunately, we ran into some jurisdictional battles between committees, and frankly, it was pretty frustrating for me because We're talking about national security.
Based on what you've learned and what you know the last couple of years, what are your major concerns when it comes to adversaries like China and Russia in cyberspace?
Boy, there's a whole series. One is the danger of a catastrophic cyber attack. If the grid goes down in New England in February, people will die. Oil burners don't fire without electricity, and it will be catastrophic. Same thing with the financial system, pipelines. I mean, water systems is a very vulnerable. There are 70,000 separate water systems in America, and all it takes is a cyber attack on a medium-sized water system to change the chemistry, close a valve, that kind of thing. It would be incredibly dangerous. So there's a whole hierarchy of problems, but here's the reality. The next 9/11 will be cyber. And right now, we're not ready for it, but we're getting there. We're working on things like continuity of the economy, how do we get back? We're working on prevention, we're working on deterrence, we're working on how to strengthen the cyber hygiene of the private sector without regulation, but with encouragement. And so, like I say, I think we're way better than we were 2 or 3 years ago, but we're not there yet.
The Cyberspace Solarium Commission finished its 2-year mission at the end of 2021. About half of its 60 recommendations were passed into law. It's continuing on as a nonprofit to try to get the rest of them enacted. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Next week on Full Measure, after decades of programs and billions spent to help, African Americans remain challenged with high poverty rates and a greater dependence on government programs than any other racial group. We travel to Rochester, New York, where a well-meaning effort that began 50 years ago is now considered to have fallen short.
It is 2022. And we're asking the same questions in 2022 that we asked in 1970. We're having the same bottlenecks of how to get people of color, African Americans in the job force in 2022 that we asked in 1970.
What they say it'll really take to solve the economic plight of blacks next week on Full Measure. Until then, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching.